Meantime, the former president, Barack Obama, has a stark warning for America that our system, quote, is captured by those who have a weak attachment to democracy. Delivering the message at an event in Hartford, Connecticut this week, he cautioned about what happens when we lose sight of upholding the Constitution.
We start drifting into something that is not consistent with American democracy. It is consistent with autocracies. We're not there yet completely, but I think that we are dangerously close to normalizing behavior like that.
Jonathan Capehart is back with us. Also with us, Stuart Stevens, senior advisor for the Lincoln Project, chief strategist for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. Basil Smikle is professor of practice at Columbia University School of Professional Studies and an MSNBC political analyst. So, Jonathan, let me play some more of what President Obama said about democracy.
Our biggest challenge right now is we need democracy and social cohesion and trust more than ever. And it's probably as weak as it's been since I've been alive. And that's a bad combination.
Jonathan, you've covered Obama closely for a long time. You know how very carefully he chooses his words, pausing sometimes, as he just did. So why this message and why now?
Well, quite honestly, Chris, what the former president has been saying has been consistent since his farewell address on January 10th of 2017. His concerns about democracy. Remember, the person who succeeded him in the White House when he left was Donald Trump. And so now here we are in the second Trump administration, a second Trump tour in the White House, and all the things that the former president, President Obama, said in 2017 on January 10th have only expanded, have only grown those concerns. And so he has been very consistent about what he's saying. The one thing he hasn't done that has been very frustrating to a lot of Democrats, and Chris, it drives me insane, is that, to your point, he doesn't come out there all the time. He is not in our faces all the time. And when he does come out, we pay attention simply because of that. But I also think, Chris, we lose sight of the fact that President Obama doesn't pop out there like Punxsutawney Phil. It's because when he left the White House, he told everybody, and I'm quoting, "I'm asking you to believe," meaning in democracy, in the country, "not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours." When he left the White House, he wanted people to understand that the progress that the country had made up until that point in his presidency wasn't just about him. It was because of them. And he told them, if you are upset about something, put on your shoes, knock on some doors, run for office yourself. He has been saying that consistently since he left the White House. And why Democrats don't listen to him and take his advice and look to themselves for the leadership and the power that they're looking for from him is beyond me.
Well, I wonder also the fact, Basil, that he never names Trump, didn't name Trump during that hour-long conversation. He seems to be following the norms, right? The norm has always been you don't criticize the sitting president as a former president, right? Maybe there is a message here that sometimes the old ways are better. Norms are in place for a reason.
Well, you know, he's still, if not one of the most effective communicator that Democrats have had. But I really want to lean on one of Jonathan's points because it's really important. That when he was president, he got elected sort of going around the Democratic Party. He kind of created Obama for America, which was proprietary for him. So what I think a lot of Democrats are saying is that where are the coattails? Where is the infrastructure that helped you? How can it help us? And I think that's really the change in our politics, sort of on the left.
But there are plenty of Democrats, and maybe you've been one of them, who has suggested you can't look backwards and use what worked
Right.
a dozen years ago,
Correct.
or 16 years ago, or however long
Right.
it was, he was first elected, and apply that to 2026 or 2028.
I absolutely agree with that, but I do think that there's something important about the structure, the infrastructure of a party that gets elected, everyone from the sheriff of a county to president of the United States. There's something that people believe is a pathway to political and economic empowerment that can be had through the party. And the reason that, to me, that's important is because also another part of what Obama said was that liberals may have gotten too complacent. He said that in his remarks. He said that, we may have gotten too comfortable in believing that the way that the things that we believed and the way in which we won these elections, we can go off and now be comfortable in going on our vacations and doing those things.
Well,
We
can I
need to
play that
actually go out and work.
Let me play
Sure.
that, and I'll get your reaction on the other side.
Right.
You could be as progressive and socially conscious as you wanted, and you did not have to pay a price. You could still make a lot of money and have a house in the Hamptons and still think of yourself as a progressive. And now things are a little different. We now have a situation in which all of us are going to be tested in some way. And we are going to have to then decide what our commitments are.
I talk about this all the time, that it really does, and Jonathan also made this point, it really comes down not just to what's happening in D.C. and not just about where you think the party should go, but what are you doing in your communities to move the needle? And that's one of the things where I do think if we can't spend so much time talking about whether or not Obama has coattails, those days are gone. We can't so much speak about whether the party itself is broken, because that actually could be fixed, and we need to focus on that too. But we also need to pay attention on giving people locally the tools, the weapons to be able to fight back.
So I have spent countless weekends on the campaign trail with state legislative candidates, with local candidates who have long complained to me about the fact that they're fighting an uphill battle without help from the party. So, Stuart, while Obama is sounding the alarm about democracy, the New York Times reports that the DNC is in chaos, that they're desperate for cash. They say Obama is headlining a DNC fundraiser next month at the home of New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. Is this a sign of the state of the Democratic Party? The top messenger and fundraiser is somebody who hasn't been in office for nearly a decade.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with the Democratic Party is they ought to shut up about the Democratic Party. I mean, I really don't understand this. They're like a bunch of doctors. They have a patient walk into the emergency room with a nail in his head, and they're having a focus group about why the guy has a headache. Look, you have the most dangerous president that has existed certainly since the Civil War. And we have a situation here where it's obvious what they should do. They should wake up every day and attack Trump and attack Trumpism. We have an international crisis, which a bunch of idiots and stooges advising the President of the United States, who is himself an idiot and a stooge. Why do you have to have focus groups to talk about this? And the idea that there's some message that's going to work here. The days where you could have a campaign and say, okay, we're going to have an education week, we're going to have, a jobs week. Those days really never worked, the truth. Back when we pretended they did. But there is no reason to have one message from the Democratic Party.
Well, should it be? Let me ask you something very specifically, because we just were in the White House press briefing. Do they need to be more in the moment? For example, I'm thinking about the Economist YouGov poll that came out today. Should the U.S. get involved in the Iran-Israeli conflict? Among Trump supporters, 19% say yes. 53% say no. Not to talk about that in those terms, is that a missed opportunity?
Yeah, look, I think that you should talk about what people are talking about. And the point here is, who is advising the President of the United States? Pete Hegseth. You have this fight inside the Republican Party with the Tucker Carlson wing, whatever the heck that is, and these people. I mean, you have Laura Loomer picking national security people. This is a disgrace. This is incredibly dangerous. And that's what you ought to be talking about. You shouldn't shy away from this. I don't think that you can vote for Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense and call yourself a patriot. I don't. And I think they ought to be saying that. They should be out there attacking the Republican Party. And people follow passion. They follow conviction. Why is it that all those people are out there with AOC and Bernie? It's not because they agree with AOC and Bernie, because, I mean, whatever the heck that is. I mean, Bernie's to the right of the Republican Party on foreign policy now. It's because they believe in something and they're out there being passionate. And that's what the party needs to do. And I think people will follow that. There's a distinct need for it. And the Republican Party is the party in crisis, not the Democratic Party. You lost an election. Okay, that happens. But look at what is happening to the country. Nothing that Donald Trump ran on is happening. You know, price of eggs hasn't gone down. He didn't end the Ukraine war. We now have elected officials being arrested. We've reached a point where we have masked men demanding papers from American citizens.
Yeah.
And you have to have focus groups about what to talk about? No, just go out there and say it and let everybody say it in a different way. That's okay. Speak to your different constituencies. But, you know, run to the sound of the guns. Don't debate whether or not those are guns going off.